Hi there, and welcome to another episode of my book club. It's been half a year now since the last episode, and it's also reached 500 views, which I'm very thankful for, because I had a fear that no one would watch it. So now that there's a couple milestones at it, I think it's about time that I talk about the books that I told you guys to read till this time. So, I mean, you've had a lot of time, so if you haven't read them already, then you're probably not going to read them. And it's also okay if you just want to hear me talk about them. But anyway, the books were Nabokov's Lolita, and then it was Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And I don't actually have them with me in physical form. I believe Dorian Gray, the picture of Dorian Gray, was in my intro sequence to my book club that I filmed when I made the first one. I mean, I did have it, but I bore a lot of them from the library, so I know if I like them or not before I go out and actually purchase them. So we'll start with Nabokov, and then we'll move on to Oscar Wilde, because I have a lot of things to say. I feel I have a lot of emotions about the book I read. And that's not to say, Lolita, I found it to be extremely well written, and well, I wasn't reading a version in the original language, so I looked it up, and it's known for being extremely well written. So it wasn't just that I had a very good translator, it was in fact something that we should praise the author for. So if nothing else, I think you should at least read his work for just the beauty in his skill set in using language, which you can hear I'm not as good as he is. But he's really a master at that. I find him to be. I mean, from that standpoint alone, I think it was a really good book. And if you don't know Lolita, it's a book about an elderly man, middle-aged elderly man who is quite interested in little girls, especially the little girl of a woman that he marries. And the book is about him trying to get her, and so on and so forth, and his like journey through the whole thing. Of course I find it absolutely appalling. I think the main character is a horrible person. Though of course there is some backstory to how he came to be the way he is. He's still a horrible person. Unexcusable, but I think it's an important piece of literature, and from the research I've done, I've gathered that it was an important part of realizing that there was actually a problem with child abuses, because it was published in 1950s in America, and the thing was that apparently it was very common to... They knew of the concept, but it was very common to think, oh, it doesn't happen here, and everyone is so like, we live in a nice community, and so on and so forth. So it was very good at highlighting that there might actually be a problem that's hiding beneath the surface, and bringing attention to the situation that children can find themselves in. And it actually raised awareness about this sort of issue in American society. Especially because it is a very big taboo subject, but it's a subject that's incredibly important to be talked about. And I don't think in any way the writer is condoning of his behavior, but he's showing the way that he maneuvers society and manages to hide it because they don't want to see it, the people around him. And I think that's like, I think it's an important read. I think it says a lot about American society and society in general, how we work around such taboo subjects and how we ignore things we don't want to see. And the language too, I have to mention it again because it was just such beautifully written. If anything, read it for that alone. And luckily I don't remember it being extremely graphic, though it did make me uncomfortable at times, and I'm glad it did, in the sense that I think that's also a good thing about literature, is that it can make us uncomfortable. And as far as I know, it's banned in American classrooms, so that's another good reason to read it. Because, I don't know, I don't like when people put censorship on literature in that sort of way. Anyway, it also says something that it was allowed and became big in America because it didn't have swear words and it wasn't very vulgar in its language. Then it was actually allowed to be read by a lot of youngsters. So I guess it's that also says something about society, that it's an extremely rough topic, it's extremely taboo, it's an extremely hard novel, but because it wasn't written in a harsh tone with bad words, then it was allowed to be read. So yeah, I mean, for all those interesting I'm not doing a very good job at explaining it, but for all those interesting cultural aspects of it and for his mere skill set in writing, I think it's definitely worth to have a look at if you haven't already. And if you have, please write what you think of it, because I'd very much like to hear what other people have to say about it as well. I found it interesting. But moving on to Oscar Wilde, it's a classic that I have not read. I don't know what to say. I was really taken aback by... I read the uncensored picture of Dorian Gray and then I read up on the differences, and I was really happy that I read the uncensored one. And my heart bled for Basil. Basically, it's about a young man. I'm sure everyone knows the story. It's about a young man that is beautiful and interesting and charming and beautiful, and this painter Basil is so taken by him, it's his muse, so he paints him, and then the painting ages and gets to have a horrible look because of the way that Dorian acts and Dorian does not, and Dorian has the bad guidance of Lord Henry. So Dorian, he becomes morally corrupt and he does horrible things, and the painting ages and he doesn't. And I'm sure everyone has a familiarity with the story, and once again we could talk about the beautiful language, but I feel like that says itself with Oscar Wilde. It was really beautifully written, and I really fell in love with, especially, well, of course Dorian's charming, but he's such more of an idiot than I figured. I imagined he'd be sleek and intelligent, but he came across to me like a bit of a dimwit, like beautiful and charming nonetheless, but he just has no idea what he's doing, does he? I mean, that was surprising. What's even more surprising is that he is depicted as a blonde, angelic looking creature, and the thing is, even on the book cover of the book, like my version of the book, it's he's depicted with black hair. So why? I think it's because people want him to look mysterious and evil and edgy, but I think the most important aspect about Dorian is that he looks like an angel, and that's why he's trusted so much. So even though I do appreciate the dark-haired versions of Dorian Gray, I feel like it's missing the point a little bit about Dorian as a character, because I think it's a very important of course his looks are a very important aspect of him. I sort of felt like that was lacking, and my heart bleeds for poor Basil. The thing was, when I'd read it, I walked around, and it's one of those novels where I read it and it shook my world for a couple of weeks. Like, I walked around, I tried to read a bit more about Oscar Wilde and his life, and I was just, every minute of the day pretty much, I was thinking about that novel. And I think it was because it was just so beautifully written, and the story was so interesting, and I feel like, given the backdrop of Oscar Wilde's own life and his struggles with his homosexuality in Victorian era, and the fact that it was used against him, the novel, in order to get him sentenced, was even more interesting. I know the backdrop, I'm doing a very bad job at explaining, but I'd suggest that people look it up themselves. I would suggest you look it up yourself, because it's really worth a read. Both the novel and about Oscar Wilde as a person, because he was a fascinating character. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel like the uncensored, having read up on the differences between the uncensored and the censored version, because Oscar Wilde, as far as I know, his publicist censored him and he self-censored himself as well, because they were worried about how people at that age would react to the book. And I just find such beauty in the things that that he censored out later on. So if I am to suggest you reading one of the versions, I would suggest that you read the uncensored one. Though if it's a little bit too gay for you, I'd suggest you go with the censored version. If that's not your thing, then that's fair. But even for historical reasons, it's important as well. So anyway, next time is gonna be fairly soon, and I'm really excited about that. And the thing is that I have picked 2 pieces of literature, very short, because I'm going to be posting next one very near Christmas. Then it's gonna be Christmas centered by one author. It's by Danish Hans Christian Andersen, and the good thing is that it's such short little stories that they take 5 minutes to read each, and I'm going to post links down below in the description so you can go read them for free, like now. If you want to, it takes 5 minutes. And given the beauty of the stories, I can imagine that you don't want to miss it for the time it takes and the fact that it's free and effortless to read it. I mean, I definitely recommend it. Hans Christian Andersen is an amazing writer, one of my favourite, and I know it's nice and Christmassy if you like that, and otherwise it has very important topics if you're not into Christmas, or if you aren't, I was going to say Christian, but I don't think a lot of people celebrate Christmas or Christians. Anyway, so even if you're not into Christmas, then you can still read them, of course, because they're more interesting than the fact that they're Christmas stories or centered around that time of the year. So it's The Little Match Girl and it's the Christmas Tree. The Behind Tree or the Christmas Tree, I'm not sure. Anyway, thank you for tuning in this time. I hope it was somewhat interesting. Please go read them, and I don't know, thank you for watching and sticking with me. I hope, yeah, it was interesting. I already said that, so anyway, see you next time.